Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Tables with your host, Rob Bradley,
John Charles Ciccarelli,
James Burrows,
and Damien Hallwood.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 49 of Tales from the Tables, a Roll Dark
49.
podcast.
Woo!
49. Can you believe it?
Oh my gosh. We've come so far.
Yes.
We've got so far to go. I don't know what that's
A
from.
musical interlude here. You may be able to tell
Listen.
from those dulcet tones that we have one of my co-hosts back. It's JC. Welcome back, buddy.
Thank you. Good to be back. Still under the weather a little bit, so I apologize for the chestiness and the coughiness and whatever else happens today, but good to be back anyway.
Fab. Well, it is good to be back. We took a bit of a break last week. This time of year, between a lot of illnesses going around and things being super busy at home and at work and what have you, it's tricky to get everybody together for this.
Very true.
I
holiday travel as well. Yeah.
I had a mare of a day last week on the day we were due to record, and I think everyone else was in the same boat. So, yeah. But we're back.
You all right? Everything worked out?
All good. Yeah, just mad stuff at this time of year. Nothing serious.
Right on. Happy holidays, everybody. This is what happens.
This is it. Yeah, the most wonderful time of the year.
Indeed.
And it is. It's a lot of fun. We're going to have some fun on the podcast today. We're going to talk a little bit about some news. There's not a great deal going on this last couple of weeks, but there's some interesting tidbits and some stuff to talk about. Then we'll dive into some Tales from the Tables.
Yeah.
But first, as I did this last week, if you're a new listener to the podcast and you don't know what Roll Dark is, we are a professional GM agency for hire. You can go to rolldark.co.uk and take a look at online, in-person, private, corporate events, whatever you're looking for. Tabletop RPGs, D&D included, of course, in there. Hire yourself a professional GM either for an ongoing weekly campaign, a one-shot, a daft bit of fun, whatever you're looking for. We've got games running right now that you can join, or you can tailor yourself your own private game in person or online and have some holiday fun in the worlds of Dungeons and Dragons and TTRPGs.
Yeah.
All right.
Actually, as a matter of fact, my Monday Vecna Eve of Ruin game is still hoping to fill the final slot. So yeah, if you're interested in joining us on Monday evenings, we've moved our time, I believe, to 6:30 p.m. UK time local. And we're a fair bit in, but in terms of where the actual written adventure is, because I know you're running it as well, Damien. I've spun off at this point, so I've added a lot of extra content and in between stuff in my personal rewrite of the adventure. But characters are level 11. We go to level 20, so we're still in the early stages. But plenty of room and plenty of time for you to join us and stop Vecna from taking over the universe. And if you think that's a spoiler, don't worry. It's not. It's on the back of the tin, basically.
Yeah.
Let us know. Send me a Discord message if you're interested, and if or if you know anyone who is. And if not, well, then all the merrier.
Indeed. On that note, my Vecna game is fully subscribed. However, if you're looking for something completely different, Fallout on a Thursday night does have some spaces available if you're interested in trying your hand at saving the Commonwealth in the midst of a radioactive nuclear winter, amidst a growing cult that is spreading across the landscape and may well not have the Commonwealth's best interests in mind.
Honestly, I have to say, if you don't jump on this opportunity, dear listener, I might wedge myself into Damien's game because it sounds so good. If you're a listener of the podcast, you know how many of his most recent Tales from the Tables have come from this game and how ridiculous in the Fallout way, or the way that only Fallout can capture the stories have been. It sounds so great. It sounds like it's a fun time, but also super interesting and layered and very niche. And it sounds like the system is a hit as well. So definitely worth a check out. You have my endorsement.
It's a lot of fun, and we may well have more tales from that table later on in this very episode.
Ooh, yay.
But
Nice.
before that, if you don't mind, we can dive into some news.
Let's do it.
Absolutely. Beginning with Dungeons and Dragons, and I think probably the biggest thing that's going on, definitely in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, and kind of in the world of video games as well at the minute, is the release of the first 8 episodes for Secret Level, an anthology series of incredible animated shorts based on your favorite video game franchises. There are 8 more coming on, I believe, the 17th of December. This is on Amazon Prime. From director Tim Miller and the same people that were responsible for Love, Death, and Robots.
Yep.
So if you love that series and you love video games, this is for you.
Definitely has that feel to it. The same structure, the same episodic lengths for each segment. Nothing is related to each other, like you said. Anthologic? I wish there were a word. It's an anthology series. But yeah, the very first one is the D&D episode, which you and I have both watched, Damien. Do you want to get into it? Spoilers?
Yeah, I mean, it is about 15-20 minutes in length in total.
Yeah.
So there isn't a huge amount of spoilers, I don't think, especially since probably the biggest spoiler was in the trailer.
Yeah, all the spoilers were in the trailer.
So,
I put together the story of it pretty much entirely from the different trailer bits and clips before it launched, but it was still really good. It's always, to me, it's always fascinating to watch, specifically with D&D shows. I've been binging the season 3 of Vox Machina as well on Amazon Prime, or The Legend of Vox Machina, and I love to see an artist's interpretation of familiar spells and abilities that we see, right? There was nothing cooler. I think I squeaked like a little girl when I saw the monk catch an arrow and deflect missiles and throw it back into an enemy. And I was like, it's so good.
Yeah, very, very awesome. So it sounds like you enjoyed it.
I did. I honestly, I think the animation is obviously gorgeous, and the voice acting was really well done. It's very short. The story is very self-contained, very simple. There's nothing that I disliked about it. I thought it was overall very interesting, and I don't think it breaks canon. And we, like I said, and like you said, this is going to be a spoiler review of it because it's only about 20 minutes in length. There's a very familiar face that makes an appearance at the very end, but it's kind of the recurring theme throughout. Effectively, here we go. If you want to experience it for yourself, tune out now for the next couple of minutes. But otherwise, I'll tell you. It's basically about a small group of adventurers that rescue a human boy who has been kidnapped by the cult of the dragon, and the human boy has all these tattoo-like markings on his flesh that mark him as a sacrifice for Tiamat. And Tiamat herself makes a grand appearance at the very end, which is very cool. But the animation for the dragons was, I think, I don't know how these things work in terms of CGI and budget, but when you see something really good and you're like, oh, they blew a lot of the CGI money on those dragons. That's what it felt like. They were well animated, well voiced, beautifully drawn and depicted. And it actually makes me lament something. I know a lot of people are fans of the new gold dragon design in the 2024 DMG and what we've seen so far, which will come out in the Monster Manual. And they're redesigning a lot of dragons and how they appear in this redesign. I love creativity, and I think in different systems and obviously different worlds and different franchises and IPs, dragons being different is of course fundamental. But D&D, at least from second edition onward, has always had this very sort of robust lore specifically about how certain dragons appear and why they appear that way. There's a reason a blue dragon has that iconic horn growing on the front of its face. There is a reason the brass dragon has the flares on the side of the head. And the fact that they changed some of the designs in the 2024 DMG has never really, / Monster Manual, has never really sat that well with me because, they were trying to reinvent it a little bit, which is fine. No trouble there. But there's so much history and so much beloved lore onto the current existing designs of those dragons that it was a genuine pleasure to see a beautifully animated with CGI, gold dragon in all of its glory, probably an adult or an ancient, right? Based on how it was depicted, which you get to see plenty of during this 20-minute episode of Secret Level. And it was so cool. And the spells that you get to see and the fight that you get to see, or the couple of fights you get to see, are really cool as well. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. What was your take, David?
I'm probably about in the same boat as you. Visually, it's incredibly arresting. For me, the moment that got a genuinely visceral reaction out of me was the emergence of Tiamat.
Yeah,
Seeing
that was cool.
as the smoke cleared and seeing each of the 5 heads, sort of each of them looking terrifying and sinister and intelligent, and each of them preparing to flare off their individual power, crackling beneath their teeth. I got, quite honestly, got a little emotional. Like I had a genuinely emotional reaction to seeing that. It was so powerful.
There's a lot of love into her design. Every time I feel like I see updated artwork on Tiamat or something updated on Tiamat, it gets scarier. She is, some of the art that we got even in the beginning of 5th edition 10 years ago now was beautiful and the best we've ever gotten, and we've only gotten better at that since. It's kind of crazy. They released that miniature, last year, 2 years ago?
Yeah.
The largest scale mini they've ever released for D&D, or the WizKids at least. Like, it's just so iconic. And this animated short, I think, brings that to a new bar. The heads are humongous. Yeah. The features are prominent. The breath weapons all looked unique. It wasn't just like 5 different filters on an energy cone. Yeah. The lightning crackled as a beam. The acid spewed with mass. The fire roiled. The ice sharded outwards. That sounds wrong. It had icy shards in a elemental blast. My favorite part, though, because I was just saying, I love to see an artist's interpretation of different D&D spells and features. But my favorite was when the kid blocks all of those 5 energy beams at once with a shield of some sort. He's like, I've been fighting her my whole life. Get behind me. And I was like, that's cool. What spell is that? Yeah. I call bullshit. There's no spell. And then at the end, it's very great. Like, all the characters are like, I believe you could take her alone, but you're not alone. And they all have their cool suit up moment where they're all prepping their different abilities, and Tiamat runs at the screen and all the heads lunge forward. And I'm like, I remember my reaction to that alone in the living room was, aw, you're all dead. It's cool, but you're all dead. There's no way you guys are going to survive this encounter. Unless, this cleric is like, some godsend because they can cast a shield that blocks all of Tiamat's breath weapons.
Yeah. It was definitely rule of cool for sure. I think what I thought you were going to say, and what is probably my favorite interpretation of a spell in the episode, is an over-the-shoulder shot of the gnome spellcaster trying to cast a spell, and the enemy, which I presume was a lich or similar.
Yeah, I think it's a lich.
Only his hand visible on the screen and his shoulder, and he kept clicking his finger and just counterspelling constantly. And just the I assume it was counterspell, and the arrogance of just clicking his fingers and saying, nope.
Nope. Oh, is that a firebolt? Nope. Oh, is that a quickened firebolt or something? Nope. It was clearly a wizard, so not a sorcerer. But still.
It was so cocky and so arrogant, and just so, like, it could have been so, the spell firing at them and then twisting the spell out of existence and throwing it away, or, any variation on that theme. But instead it was just click fingers and no spell happens.
It's the no fun allowed button. Yeah. It very much felt exactly like how Counterspell is designed in 5th edition. It's just nope with the snaps. It was great. There was a great wind wall, which is not that popular of a spell, I think, but they're fighting on the bridge at one point, the heroes versus the enemies, the Lich and its minions, and they summon a wind wall to block their progress. That was cool. There was a giant bat or a dire bat style monster in it as well.
I have to just call out environment design on that bridge.
Oh, beautiful.
The bridge was a sword being held horizontally by a humongous statue, and
Yep.
the bridge was the blade of the sword from one end of the cliff to the other.
So
Beautiful
cool.
environment design. What a great idea.
Yeah, so cool, so cool. It was visually, it was a gorgeous episode. As I was telling you a little bit earlier, just before we started recording, while the story was absolutely fine and pretty much exactly what I expected, I did get a chance to watch the rest of the shorts from Secret Level, and I think the D&D episode certainly stands out as pretty unique. But the one that really spoke to me, and I won't get into any spoilers here. I'd love for everyone to check it out, was oh gosh, I had just said it. It's not
Unreal Tournament, I think is what you
Unreal
said.
Tournament. I keep wanting to say Mortal Kombat. I know it's not Mortal Kombat. The Unreal Tournament episode caught me by massive surprise because I didn't know anything about the franchise. I still don't. And it was storytelling done very, very well in the way that some of the best episodes of Love, Death, and Robots has been done, basically. And it tells us a simple story in a very robust way, and with a lot of excellent small cues. And there's not a lot of voice acting in it.
No.
It's not a lot of dialogue in it. So definitely check it out if you're interested in this sort of stuff. And you mentioned, Damien, that there's more coming. Another 8 episodes?
Yeah, another 8 episodes. Some people may have noticed that in the trailer there were things like Mega Man and some references to Sony, as well as some others, like Concord, sadly. Those episodes will be coming a bit later in the month. So the entire season is not out yet, just a portion of it. The only other episode I got a chance to check out so far, because I chose the 2 that I was most invested in. However, I have at least tangential knowledge of many of the other episodes, including Sifu, which I'm very excited about checking that episode out.
Sifu was great.
I've played that game and really enjoyed it. Was Warhammer 40K.
Yes, yeah.
And
4K.
it never, and we're going to touch on this a little bit more in a second, it never gets old seeing Space Marines depicted in a way that the Space Marines are supposed to be depicted. When you look at them, they look huge and bulky and square and like they will just plod forward and slowly,
they're
like
terrifyingly
a tank.
Fast.
They are terrifyingly fast and agile, and they have enhanced senses anyway, but then that's augmented by the suit, so they can be so accurate and so devastating in close quarters combat, even if they're not directly looking at you. And just the combination of seeing them move with lightning reflexes, terrifyingly carvy, even though what they're fighting is quite clearly the bad guy, they are terrifying, absolutely terrifying to see them just work through people like they're nothing. And then at the same time, this unstoppable, unrelenting march forward between combats of just walking in a straight line, even when the terrain says, hey, this is going to be tough, this is a bottomless chasm. And one of my favorite bits about this is without hesitation, they get to the top of that chasm, they don't speak, they don't look at each other, they don't acknowledge that it's deep in any way, they just step off and slide down the chasm wall. Keep moving forward. It's stunning. And if anybody's seen the on YouTube, there was an Astartes series. The guy
I was about to call this out. Yeah,
the guy that did that did work on this, and it's evident.
That makes a lot of sense. When you say that, I don't know if it's Astartes because I'm not that familiar with the lore, but is this the one where there's like another enemy faction that freezes the Space Marines as they're advancing, and they're like fighting against that force?
Yes,
basically. That's it reads so well. I've seen that clip because it's very famous on YouTube, and it depicts how inherently dangerous these humongous Space Marines can be. And how, like, if you let them get close, it's over. You can't let them get close because the minute they are within firing range or striking range with those chainsaw things that they have, it's over for you. It doesn't matter what or who you are. Which at the time, because it was actually in this apartment that my friend was, I'm cat sitting for a friend. He was the one who's very into Warhammer. So right now I'm surrounded by a lot of Warhammer stuff. He was explaining the lore to me, and I was like, oh, so the humans aren't the good guys. And he's like, yeah. That's the whole point of this. There are no good guys. That even the Imperium are just assholes in the frankest sense of the word. I was like, okay, this makes a
Yes.
lot of sense. Yeah,
Yeah. They, very, very, very long story short, their emperor is now a corpse
right,
who only exists through psychic power across all of the galaxy, and his his sort of his one mandate was that he not be seen as a god. And the moment he becomes incapable of telling people that rule, they see him as a god and
as a
revere
god,
him as
right,
a god and commit untold atrocities to both keep that veneer up and keep him, quote unquote, alive on that chair.
right,
The things that they
right.
do to keep the religion and his existence constant are abhorrent. And
It's wild. Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
it's very sci-fi gothic. If you don't know Warhammer 40k at all, it's sci-fi gothic. It's very knights and relics and ancient warriors and religions through the
Mm.
lens of incredible war machines and spaceships and armored centurions and aliens and demons. It's a fascinating world which touches on a large number of sort of peripheral sci-fi
Yeah, which
themes.
we're supposed to only get more of in coming years, because I know I keep seeing the Henry Cavill led series getting greenlit and then getting
Well,
delayed or stuff. Oh,
we
okay, we got
we
news.
we just had a confirmation, not no less than a year after it was first announced, that he was in talks with Amazon and Games Workshop to get something off the ground. I believe they only had a year. They had until this very month to finalize something on that deal, and they've all been sequestered away in a little room talking about, because I've referenced it earlier. It's a massive, massive world that spans literally millennia,
Yeah,
and
it's been around for what, 40 years,
yeah,
nearly, right?
and so finding an onboarding point for new fans while at the same time pleasing the and especially these days, massively increasing number of existing fans who know the lore backwards must be a very daunting task. But it seems that they haven't said what, but they have come to an agreement collectively, Henry Cavill, Amazon Studios, and Games Workshop, on how and where they will start. And I believe it will begin, which sounds very much like they see this as a franchise having legs. They will begin with a TV series from Amazon
Cool.
Prime.
All right, let's do it.
And it is
I'm
now
ready.
in active production.
Look, as long as they don't sucker me into playing the actual game and spending the rest of my hard-earned savings on miniatures and everything else, I will absolutely. The lore itself fascinates me. I'll even buy the video game, but I feel like my wallet will never forgive me if I start getting into it. That's the only thing.
JC, to
No,
quote
nope.
to quote a famous android, I can't lie about your chances, but you have my sympathies.
Yeah, fair. Oh
Um,
gosh.
okay,
That's
that out of
great.
the way
That's good.
then.
That's a good bit of news and a great segue into it. Good stuff.
That out of the way, that's pretty much all the major D&D and, of course, Warhammer 40k news out of the way. A brief little bit on Daggerheart from Darrington
Yeah.
Press. Previously you could pre-order both the standard and limited editions of Daggerheart, but the cover art was yet to be revealed for those books. It now has been revealed, and
Nice.
it's, I have to say, very beautiful.
Ooh.
The standard cover by Matt Wilmer and limited cover by Dominic Mayer. The standard cover is a classic enemies and characters spread across, almost like a movie poster spread across the main page,
Yeah.
with the
I see
title at
it.
the top. A sort of color split between cool blues at the top half and sort of fiery yellows and oranges on the bottom half, bisected diagonally through the middle. Very, very beautiful piece of artwork, but I have to say the limited edition cover is quite striking.
Mm.
It's a very enlarged version of the logo for Daggerheart with the gold and purple, with artwork nestled inside those colors. So again, it has a color split and a tone split on the cover, but is much more artistic and sort of what's the word I'm looking for?
I see the color split. I see the logo rather, and now I understand how it's incorporated in. That's so cool.
Yeah, very beautiful covers. You can pre-order both now.
I'm a big fan. If you're looking at the cover, there's obviously the front, which is what you were talking about with the blues on one side, the oranges on the other. But if you look at the whole spread, as they sometimes show you, like what the back cover and the front cover look like together, as if it were one fold-out artwork piece. The flip side of that book on the standard edition is really striking and beautiful as well. There is a mountain that kind of divides both sides of this, and what looks like a three-eyed stag with three sets of antlers growing from its head. Very ethereal, very mystical, under the shadow of two moons with a purple aurora cutting through the night sky. It looks very cool, very like dark and mysterious and interesting and evocative, very luring you into the whole whatever the lore is of this world and this stuff. I honestly know next to nothing about Daggerheart because I got a little burned on their other not Darrington Press, but Critical Role's other IP, their other
Candela
system,
Obscura.
Candela Obscura. I got a little burned on that because the system apparently wasn't very good, but I was so about the world that they had introduced, and the lore was just exactly what I was looking for, like a Fey industrial revolution, post-war Victorian element-esque stuff. I've talked about it before on the podcast episodes ago, but it was the perfect little setting that I wanted to explore more of. And I was like, oh, it's hitting all the right buttons. This like dark, gritty, urban fantasy with, there's like, you can have vampires, but Fae at the same time, but people like making smoke bombs. And it was just apparently that it was kind of a bomb because the system didn't do very well and it wasn't well designed, which is a shame. But so that's why I know next to nothing about Daggerheart and its world, but it looks really cool. I'll say
they've never had, from Critical Role as they were sort of growing in popularity and fan base, right through to Darrington Press and publishing all their own stuff, and they've had access to incredible artwork for so long. They've got comic books of the various campaigns released regularly with incredible artists. Fan art alone they're able to draw from. I know that they've ended up hiring or at least reaching out to fan art individuals to get official artwork for their material and stuff. So they've never had a shortage of artists, and this shows, if the covers of these books is anything to go by, then I think these will be quite a lavish product to enjoy just looking at. Especially since it uses a deck of cards as a sort of character building mechanic.
That's cool.
So the cards will presumably be very pretty too.
Ooh.
So you can pre-order the standard edition and limited edition now. It states that the limited edition will never be reprinted again. So once it's gone, it's gone. And it features, as well as the book itself in a limited cover, it's got a GM screen, tokens, a nice box to keep all of your cards in, character sheets, things like that. I suspect many of those things you will be able to buy separately, just not in this.
Oh, I'm sure.
In this limited design.
Yeah, this package, right?
Yeah. Very cool. I'm looking forward to seeing that because I've only played and watched the very early iterations of the game when they were sort of actively playtesting it. And enjoyed it well enough, and so if it's that plus a load of sort of fan-inspired tweaks and improvements, then I'm sure it'll be good fun to play through. So I look forward to giving that a whirl. When it comes out next year.
So what else are we looking forward to next year coming out? Because there's been a lot. And I know we have a sort of idea of what D&D is planning on doing next year, not including the Monster Manual, which is coming out in February. But they've already announced a few books, right? Have they announced any adventures coming out in 2025?
I don't believe so. I don't
think so,
not actual adventures. They've announced the Dragon Anthology.
Right.
they've announced the Forgotten Realms campaign guide.
That's what that was, right?
Uh,
Okay, but there's no actual module being released as far as
Not
we know.
that I'm aware of. No, not yet.
Wow.
Not yet. Be interesting to see what
I'm sure
would
they
be
will.
their first choice for that when
Yeah,
it
they
comes
they
to it.
can't go through a year without introducing something new. I'm sure
Surely.
we'll see it announced very probably soon.
Yeah, once the Monster Manual, all the sort of hoo-ha and kerfuffle of the Monster Manual has passed by in February,
Right.
presumably early into next year, we'll get a glimpse at what the first adventure module will be. And it'll be very
Yeah.
fascinating to see, because there's so many directions they could take it in, up to and including redoing existing ones, which I don't know how I would feel about that, but it's a possibility. It's a possibility.
Yeah. Very true.
Last couple of tidbits here. I mentioned Lord of the Rings in this episode.
I was hoping you would talk about this.
My
Yeah.
solo outing. That Lord of the Rings was coming to D&D Beyond. The
Mhm.
5e conversion of it, not the One Ring, which is a separate rule system
Right.
from Free League. And they're releasing yet another supplement book for both. When they, of course, because they've got two versions of this rule system, they're releasing this effectively the same supplement for each, and each actually has a different title. So
Wow. Wait, so these are both by Free League?
yes, yeah.
Wow. I
So
had no idea. Okay.
the Lord of the Rings role playing, which is the 5e conversion of that world into 5e rule systems, and then there's the One Ring, which is actually the One Ring second edition.
Right, because the One Ring has been around for a while. I knew that much. Right.
Yeah, which is a bespoke rule set for that campaign. So
Right.
this is a source book exploring the world of elves.
Cool.
I know we've had a Moria one and some others, but this is specifically for the elves. And for the One Ring, the book is called Realms of the Three Rings.
Mm.
And for Lord of the Rings role-playing 5e, it's called Keepers of the Elven Rings. It looks
That's
like
crazy that there's two different versions of it for the different systems. That's wild to me.
It looks like they have different covers as well. And it says that both books will feature the same chapters, which will be Where the Elves Still Linger, A Dark Adventure Awaits, Landmarks, and The Rules of Fellowship.
Yeah.
So fascinating, whichever angle you're approaching Lord of the Rings from, whether it's 5e or the One Ring, you've got a pretty significant part of the lore, at least from my perspective, the elves and their existence within
Oh my
Middle Earth
God,
is
it's
huge.
integral to the history of Middle Earth. Yeah.
So
It just in general, not just the lore of Middle Earth, but the fact that D&D Beyond is spearheading gathering so many different and in sometimes directly competing properties into its fold, into like manifesting it into its fold, is just mind-boggling to me. They've been doing this for 2 years now, so it's no surprise that we've talked about it before. But like, it was before with smaller, at least compared to Lord of the Rings, smaller IPs, right? Like MCDM and their new books, and Humblewood, the campaign setting. And I was like, these are not Dungeons and Dragons. These are very unique systems that have nothing to do with D&D. They're inspired by it maybe, but it has nothing to do with D&D. And now they've openly brought in the Lord of the Rings role-playing game, which is 5e, so sure, that at least makes a little bit more sense. But it's a massive property. It's Lord of the Rings. Like, that is one of the biggest fantasy franchises in the world. If not,
pretty much.
I think it's second only to the Harry Potter franchise.
Yeah,
in
pretty
terms
much.
of high fantasy.
And pretty much
It's
responsible for Dungeons and Dragons. Like, the existence of Lord of the Rings is responsible for D&D existing in the first place.
100%, exactly. It's the primary source of inspiration. It's just crazy to me that this is all on D&D Beyond now.
Yeah,
I don't know how. I don't know what the ethos behind that company decision making is, but clearly they're like, just take it all, take everything.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
more power to us, because we have access to all of this cool stuff now through a very accessible medium.
Yeah, I
as
can only
long as,
imagine that's part of it. There was a world a dark time not that long ago where we thought this was an impossibility.
Before the dark times.
Yes, exactly. Um, let's call this the Clone Wars because so many fantasy RPGs are now coming
Yeah.
out of the woodwork, and rather than let them just exist in isolation of each other and allow people the opportunity to break away from D&D Beyond, why not keep it all under that same umbrella and keep people on and paying for your service, however
Yeah.
they're approaching TTRPGs.
Right.
Um,
Right. That's really what it is. It is truly D&D Beyond. It is
Yeah.
beyond just D&D. And listen, this will never happen. This will never ever happen. But if it does, you heard it here first. I could absolutely see them if things get very popular or go very well for them. I could absolutely see them starting to incorporate some Disney properties. I would not be surprised if Star Wars ends up on here. It'll never happen because it's Disney money and Disney has their own distributor for everything. But if it does, you heard it here first.
That would be huge.
Just watch.
That would
Yeah.
be huge.
There's also something new coming. And now that I'm on the site, I don't know if you know anything about this. There's a featured adventure from Kobold Press called Tales from the Shadows. And I've actually not seen this before. And I don't know what this is actually about. Do you know anything about this?
I don't. I know that they've been getting a lot of these third-party adventures arriving on D&D Beyond.
Very, very interesting.
So, because I know companies like Darrington Press are and Kobold Press and MCDM, the stuff that they're releasing is massively popular. On things like Drive Through RPG or the Dungeon Masters Guild. These products sell a lot. I'm running a third-party adventure from Arcanum Worlds myself on Monday night, Odyssey of the Dragon
Nice.
Lords, which
Right,
is,
right.
yeah, that's another huge third-party and a very successful one. So it's really great to see D&D Beyond embracing that, but I can only imagine that it's I say an attempt. It seems to be a successful attempt at keeping people still on that platform because, as you quite rightly said, it's despite some decisions that we've disagreed with, it's a very accessible and usable system and resource for D&D. And so
Crazy. Yeah.
keep everything under it. Keep people subscribed, because if they don't, then there are increasingly more and more and more opportunities for people to go somewhere else.
Somewhere else. That's it. They're trying to rope it all in.
It's kind of
very
like
true.
it's kind of like the things like the video game world now doing their own sort of effective streaming platforms and sort of paid subscription models where you sign up to this subscription model and you can play all these games. We didn't necessarily make them. This isn't necessarily a Sony or a Microsoft title, but we've got it under our subscription. Play it here on your console. So it seems to be a similar approach to that.
Similar setup. That's exactly right. We're only going to see more of it. Clearly, they're on the path. So
we are.
Look forward to it.
A nice little, very short but segue from previous stories. Speaking of new TTRPGs that are sort of brand new into the world, and Henry Cavill, Voltron, the role-playing game, a property I don't have a great deal of exposure to, admittedly. Voltron is live on Kickstarter. It's got 11 days to go and has exceeded its goal by a fair way, so it looks to be being made. And I happen to know that very recently filming for the live-action Voltron movie starring Henry Cavill has begun.
How did I not know about this until just now, that he was in it?
He's a very busy dude. He's also doing Highlander.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is very exciting because that's coming from the creators of John Wick. And the idea of Highlander through the lens of John Wick combat is just, yes, please.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I could love that. I'll eat it right up. There's he should have never been let go from the Witcher franchise, in my opinion.
No, he shouldn't. No,
but then again, I think that was driving itself into the ground. It's such a shame because it started so strong and so beloved, and so very rapidly and quickly took a downward turn. I never even bothered, I think, with season 3. I haven't even watched it yet. So
Voltron,
alas,
check it out on
oh,
Kickstarter.
Voltron. Yes.
If you're interested in a Voltron TTRPG, it's there for you. It looks to be.
I think is
made.
Rob a big Voltron fan? Right?
It's
I know
Gundam.
he's a big Gundam fan. Yeah,
Gundam. I don't know about Voltron. Rob, let us know wherever you are. If you are a fan of Voltron, then this is right up your street.
Edit yourself into this podcast with a little verbal clip that says, "Actually, I don't know anything about Voltron. These idiots have no idea what they're saying." Or whatever. But yeah, I think obviously Voltron was before my time. It was an early 1980s, only 3 seasons show, but it's well beloved. A lot of people love it, and obviously we're getting a lot of new stuff for it. So it's exciting. It's a good time to be a nerd, kids.
It is less exciting. I'm only going to very briefly touch on this, but it's a follow-on from last week's, or the last episode, I should say, from episode 48. I reported on this hugely irritating and in some ways clickbaity news article about Elon Musk's interaction with Wizards of the Coast.
Oh, God, right. I forgot this whole thing happened.
And it seems that having spoken the words, "How much is Hasbro?" That had an effect on Hasbro's stock price. Imagine just being able to say a handful of words and alter the stock price of a massive, major corporation like Hasbro.
Yeah, that's how closely people look at people. It's kind of crazy. There's another platform for a diatribe on this, but it fascinates me how even in Hollywood, forget business, forget government, even in Hollywood, if there is a rumor, like look at the exchange of tweets on with the platform now known as X that have been about Ryan Reynolds liking the idea of a Channing Tatum-led Gambit movie and how that is by far and away now going to be a real thing. It's not confirmed, but it will be 100%, right? There's no way it won't. All because of just a little bit of hearsay and what people are listening to. Elon Musk is 100% one of those people. If there's even a whiff of a rumor and he mentions Hasbro or to control D&D, of course that has a massive change on stock prices and in general a whole global economy, which is kind of wild.
It's pretty much how the buying and selling of comic books works.
Right.
The very moment something gets mentioned, the value and rarity and how much they're sought after for particular issues of comic books, like first appearances of characters, just skyrocket.
Skyrockets.
Deadpool, when that, before Deadpool was a very niche sort of underground character that people really loved, but he was certainly not in the public eye until it was. And now everybody knows who Deadpool is.
Now everything is Deadpool. That's right.
And the minute that
10,000 of them every Comic-Con.
Yeah, the minute that got announced, Deadpool stock went up massively. People were buying up all the first appearances. It's happened with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with The Last Ronin, a very sought-after book anyway, but now that Last Ronin is being turned into a video game, that is very hard to get hold of now, the first issue of that book.
Sure.
And certainly not for a sensible price. It's the same way. There were rumors for so long that Taylor Swift would have a role as Dazzler in the latest Deadpool and Wolverine, and that altered the landscape of any appearances of Dazzler in comic books. It's crazy. It's really wild. But it does seem, at least for the time being, that very little else has come of this, aside from a bump in stock price. There's been no other reportings on it, if you were at all interested. And no, it does not look like Elon Musk has purchased Hasbro, at least not in the short term. So fear not, ladies and gentlemen. It seems to just be another side note in the bizarre history of our hobby.
I have a friend who works in the Magic division at Hasbro. I'd love to get her on the podcast someday and have her talk about what all that was like. Just the week that Elon Musk was rumored to be buying Hasbro. I imagine the office is just nonstop communication about it. It would be so good to be a fly on the wall for that.
It really would.
Gosh. Crazy stuff.
And that brings us to the conclusion of this week's news.
Good news. Very short and sweet, but a lot of promising, interesting things going on.
Yes. Yeah. It
Right.
continues to be a wild time for this hobby, indeed.
Yeah, it really is. And only more crazy stuff coming. I recently had a lot of time on my hands and I binged all of Vox Machina Season 3, and I'm reminded just between that and the Secret Level episode and how much I just love these franchises that we make our whole lives about at this point, Damien. Obviously work-life balance being a thing, and we have real families, but for me, I live and breathe and eat all D&D and everything else all the time. So it's great to see how much attention and mainstream or mainstream adjacent attention it's all getting.
Yeah.
So, but let that be said, the heart of this hobby will always and forever be the stories that are told at individual tables and the players that interact with the worlds that their DMs and GMs create.
Yeah.
And that leads us flawlessly into a great story I'm sure you have for our Tales.
Beautifully said.
Hey.
I actually do have I have a handful of things here for Tales from the Table, some really good stuff. I'm going to start with a listener-submitted Tales from the Table from one of our very own Roll Dark GMs, Chris. He sent me at the end of last week's episode, and so I'm getting to it now. Chris, sorry for the delay on it, but I shall cover it here. It's nice and short, but it's a pretty cool tale. And then I have two of my own, which I have tentatively entitled Embracing Failure and Falling Mammoths, and Dire Dice and Cold Hard Lies.
Ooh, we should start naming our segments like this. I like it. I'll have to start doing some research and thinking ahead of time.
Absolutely. So this is from Chris and his game. So I quote, "So, homebrew game with a private client group. This was the end of the first personal story arc. The Triton bard, named Phelan, had died at the end of the Waterdeep Dragon heist, had made a pact with Cthulhu to live on, dip in Warlock. Cthulhu let them know that Yagni, the cousin, was rising in the elemental plane of water. On reaching the plane of water, via an Umbali temple and a fight with a Medusa, Phelan was confronted with their past. Their father, the king of the Tritons, had been kidnapped by a Marid, and after rescuing him, the group found themselves face to face with an abomination of an aboleth raised by Nihilor, a mind flayer that they previously fought. Or that might be Nihilior.
My God. Yeah, Nihilor or Nihilior. Yeah. I've actually used him before.
The aboleth defeated the group. The aboleth defeated. The group returned to Phelan's father. He offered to abdicate and apologize for his distance. He had gone to the City of Glass on a lead for Phelan's missing mother. He gave Phelan her mother's wedding ring and let her go save the world. The player was crying, and a wonderful moment was had."
That's beautiful. Thank you, Chris. That's a very cool. I love emotional moments like that. Big payoffs. Really cool stuff.
I was actually mentioned to Chris when he sent that over about how much I would love to dive into a very oceanic themed campaign, because it's so rarely used, because it's so specific and the rules have to be so specific and carefully planned out for Oceanborn, both over and under the water, that I imagine it's quite a challenge to put something together like that and maintain its interest and its use case. And you have to constantly, if you're not playing creatures that can inherently breathe underwater, you have to constantly think about how that's going to factor into the game, how they swim, how they breathe,
how they talk, how they communicate, how they cast spells with verbal components while water's rushing into their mouths. There's it's actually funny that this came up, because I also recently had a Marid appear in a game, because I have this great player, believe it or not, in a home game, so not a Roll Dark game, but I have a great player who one of his characters is this insipid bard who has this thick, laid-on Southern American drawl of a voice, and he calls himself Baron, or the Baron, or Baron Guttercharm. But his true form is that of this repulsive, toad-like, kind of obese, liquidy, just in general, think of the most disgusting underwater, like frog-like thing you can think of, and give it a humanoid form and a top hat and a violin, and that's this guy's character. And the backstory, to be fair, is actually really interesting, and the way he plays the character is great. But the backstory is really interesting in that he had at one point been a very successful and very charming baron, and to get out of a pact that he had made for additional power and resources, he made a new pact with this underwater Marid, and had thus changed his once very handsome appearance to something that looks like this. And he messaged me in between sessions saying, my character really is wanting to work on getting his old appearance back and breaking the curse on him. And to that end, he'll try and tempt as many people as possible to make deals with his current patron, which is this Marid from the elemental plane of water. And he said, I have to go, but I'll leave it in your hands, JC. Try and get one of these other players. I would pull him aside. My character would pull this character aside and try and get them to have a conversation. And I was like, okay. And so I had to role play his character for a bit and be like, Bastian Volscythe, do you really think that your power will be enough to face the challenges ahead? Or perhaps may I interest you in more power? And he pulls out a pearl, which, if you gaze into its watery depths, transports you to the realm of this married lord, which are called Pashidas or Padishahs, I think. Pronunciation notwithstanding, I might be butchering that. But they, it's weird, that sometimes our rolled our D&D games, or our just D&D games in general, just end up having similar themes when you wouldn't expect it. I was like, I doubt anyone's running a Marid, because it's not a very popular encounter. It's an underwater creature, etc. But I got to use a beautiful animated coral throne map, and I dropped a whole bunch of beautiful merfolk tokens, and God, what are the names of those things? I always forget the long ones that kind of look like Naga from World of Warcraft, but aren't Naga. They're not Sahuagin. I had a few of those too.
I know the ones you mean.
Marrow. That's what they're called. Marrow. A lot of Marrow tokens, beasts, and then sitting in the coral throne of it all is this, strange fish-like obese Marid genie. So great. But there you have it.
Yeah, and Chris, you find yourself in a lucky position of being able to sort of hit those sorts of emotional stakes within a game. It's always great when you can get a group that can go to that level of sort of emotional investment. There's nothing wrong with running a game that's hack and slash and lots of fun and get the level, get the magic item, move on. Those can be some of the most fun you can have at the table. But at the same time, it's incredibly humbling and I'd say rare, but increasingly less so, that you can get a group to sit around the table and willingly go to those levels of emotional investment, that it will invoke genuine, real reactions from players. And it's always really great and humbling when that occurs.
Very true.
One of my tales is kind of linked to that, in fact, for my own game.
Ooh, cool. If you don't mind, I'll intersperse one of my own. So in my Mistbound game, which is a private game I'm running for a few Roll Dark folks, there is... they've just entered another domain of dread in the Shadowfell, which I'm sure I've talked about at length here. They were in the Carnival, they were in Harakir, which is an Egyptian-inspired setting, but now they've entered Demondlieu, which is a butcherization, I'm sure, of a realm known for decadent illusions and intrigue. It's very inspired by Louis-era France, beautiful masquerade parties, but all of it is kind of just a surface-level sort of thing going on. And the party went immediately to a coven of fairy godmothers that love to help people with their costumes and accessories and masks for the upcoming Grande Masquerade at the Duchess's Palace. And each one of the three sisters in this, definitely not a hag coven, are responsible for something different, or at least in my version of things they are. They're the Maberly sisters, which are these elderly women. One of them is the dressmaker, or the outfit maker, so they'll spin you up your dress or your fancy decollage and your whatever your outfit will be for the evening, for your masquerade endeavors. Then you go to see her sister. That was Mabel. The other one is Eloise, or Isidore, actually. Isidore will fashion you and outfit you with accessories, whatever your mind's desire is. She hands you a piece of enchanted vellum, and the more you verbally describe it or imagine it, it comes to life on the parchment, and then they design it and deliver it to you. And of course, there's a small price to pay, but it's not in gold. It's just in a favor. Really a token, a trifle. And the last one I came up with on the spot, and I got to say, Damien, I'm pretty proud of this. You tell me if you think this is a stupid idea, but I was pretty proud of it. I'm sure I've seen it somewhere, and it lives in the back of my brain, and I didn't realize I stole it from something. But the last one, her name was Eloise Maberly, and she's this very kindly old woman. The art that I used depicted a human grandmotherly sort of fairy godmother figure in her 80s, like truly, truly pretty old and wrinkled, maybe even 90s. And she greets them at the door, and you can see that she has a huge collection of masks hanging from the back wall of her hut. Masquerade-style masks, very Venetian, jesters and animals and beasts and monstrosities, whatever. Different sizes, different shapes, different colors, different arrangements, half face, one eye, full face, etc. But when she needed to get a better look at something that they were trying to show her, she was squinting, and it occurred to me that her eyesight wasn't very good in this form. So out of nowhere, I was like, okay, Eloise says, oh, just a moment, dearies. And she turns around and approaches the back wall where all the masks are hanging. And with her back to the players, you just see her reach for her face without them seeing what she's doing. And you hear a tearing sound as she strips her face off and hangs it from one of the empty pegs on the wall, which of course is just a mask. It's just a Venetian-style mask of what looks like a kindly old grandmotherly figure. And then she reaches for another one that has a kind of owl design to it, a bit of a few feathers, maybe like a great horn style, pieces of it sticking out, owl-shaped mask. And then you see her put the mask on, again with her back to you, so you don't see what's happening with her face. You hear all these fleshy ripping sounds. And then she turns around and she's got a completely different face, a different voice, a different personality. And she approaches them, but with these big owl-like eyes and her eyebrows arching as if she's a great horned owl. Oh, and I didn't even say she turned around. She turned to look at them, but her head spun on a swivel as if it was like an owl without even the sound of a neck cracking or anything, just her whole head turned around to look at them, and then her body followed. And I had that happen a few times during their encounter where she would switch out masks for different personalities or different things. And I've never seen, and listen, I toot my own horn plenty, but I was pretty proud of coming up with this on the spot, because it just occurred to me, I was like, one of these three ladies needs a gimmick. And it was this. And I've never seen more repulsed faces in my Discord call than or ever before, because they were like, oh, what? And of course, I was wondering, is there going to be one of them that tries to see what they're doing, like what their face looks like when they're not wearing any masks? They never even bothered. They were literally too afraid to imagine a faceless hag. It was so much fun. And of course, they negotiated, got a couple of masquerade masks on order that fit their character themes. And they are now plunging into, as of today, I'm running the session a little bit later, they're plunging into the strange world of Portalucine and de Montlieu in order to infiltrate this grand masquerade. So we'll see what happens, and I'll keep you guys posted.
Well, to answer your question, JC, I do really like that. I think that's a wonderful idea. Hags really are the Swiss Army knife of D&D monsters. They are good. Endlessly customizable, and yet never lose what makes them what they are. They can always have these bizarre habits or appearances, to go as far as fetishes. They are each in themselves a unique monster that at the same time everybody knows is this one monster. And they're
Correct.
known to be feared, they're known to be manipulative, they're known to be a creature you should be very careful even conversing with. And it just never or rarely before have I come across a D&D monster that immediately elicits a specific reaction out of players, no matter
Yep.
what they are, where they are in any campaign. They immediately get players on edge. They start telling each other, right, be careful what you say. They immediately
Yep.
get people into this guarded, terrified position that, like you say, it encourages them to just not mess with them because
Right.
they know just how dangerous it can be. It's like it's the same sort of aura that the Deck of Many Things has. It's like,
Yes.
just
Yes.
be careful what you do with
Exactly.
it. Just be
You you
so
you
careful.
you name drop the deck of many things, or you could even just say a deck of cards. And if you have one player in your group who knows what a deck of many things are, someone will go wide eyed and go, "No!" Like, "Oh God, here it goes." And you're right, Damon. It's the same with hags, and they occupy such an interesting position because, and I think the more I think about this is the conclusion I've come to in the hobby of Dungeons and Dragons and its history. We have many iconic monsters. There's the owl bear, the mind flayer, the beholder. People recognize these things. They react certain ways when they hear about them. If you're familiar with the game, great. If you're not, then you're in for a treat because you don't know what a beholder is. Oh, it's this floating head with 11 eyes looking at you that can fire beams of hurt, etc. But it's not the same. Even with creatures that are more accessible to a wider audience, say you know nothing about D&D, but of course there's dragons in the title. You expect dragons. Dragons are iconic. They're beautiful. People act certain ways around dragons. But dragons are so varied in other forms of media that people don't necessarily know what to expect, right? They could be more Eastern inspired and they're spirits of wisdom and guidance and water, or they could be more Western inspired and they are just evil creatures that need to be slain by the knight on horseback. But hags pervade all the nursery tales and the folklore that we learned as kids. Everyone knows the Hansel and Gretel story. Everyone knows the iconic character of a crone in the woods. Everyone has heard of Snow White. Everyone knows that these represent these old crones with the power to give you what you want, but always at a melancholic price, or at a not even melancholic, but like at a detrimental price. They occupy such a very unique area of our collective as a human race, our collective sort of experiences that and there's no way to misinterpret them. They're almost 99% of the time they're considered evil. There's no fairy godmother aspect to them. Their hags are evil, right? So people get, like you said, on edge about them, and it's fascinating to me. And I know Rob is going to hate this episode because he hates hags, and we keep bringing up hags every other episode.
Yeah.
But really, they have such a unique place in the world of D&D and so many other worlds besides that. They are fun to watch people get a reaction from, and how
And on top of that, as you're absolutely right, and as an extension to that, from a GM's perspective, as well as how it influences players, from my experience, they give you carte blanche to break all the rules, and players will very rarely question you as to why. If another monster does something to you that's kind of maybe comes across as a curse or some high level spell equivalent of something that happens, they're immediately wait a minute, they're not high enough level to do that. How is there a saving throw? Whereas hags, when they do something that breaks all the rules, it's the hag.
It's the hag. We don't know her magic, right?
Yeah,
right.
I had a
honestly, oh sorry, go.
I was gonna say I had a player in my home game make a deal with a hag and then fail to meet the requirements of the deal, and slowly began to discover when they met her, she had chickens in bone cages all around her den, and they slowly began to notice that they were growing feathers and that their fingers were starting to become gnarled and long fingers, like
The
fingernails
chickens
starting
were
to grow.
people that have reneged on deals.
Yeah. And at no point did they or any of my other players go, hang on a minute, is this a curse? Do I get to, wasn't there a
Is there a
saving throw
saving
for this?
throw? Right,
You know,
right.
it was straight away like, as soon as they realized, they were like, oh no, we know what's going on. We need to do something. And
Yeah.
no other monster gets that level of sort of hall pass to just
Yeah, the
mess
carte
with
blanche,
people.
like you said. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think even in if you're talking about like high level epic campaigns, even in a place where players are fighting gods, they'll still expect the mechanics of the game to apply, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, what's sure, they might have a 30 charisma with a plus 28 to their save for whatever reason, but at least those are the numbers you can attribute to them. But with hags, you could hand wave that stuff. You could be like, yep, you reneged on a deal with a hag. They have the supernatural, not even arcane power, the supernatural power to make wishes come true or to accomplish their ends of the deal. They don't need to have a spell in their stat block for you to promise them that they'll get their heart's desire by the stroke of midnight on the third day. It'll just happen. And if they can do that, then they can curse you into becoming chickens. It's great.
Yeah.
I love that. Totally going to yoink that at some point. They'll notice a bunch of chickens in bone cages at a hag's place. I think I have a hag with a cockatrice in a different game, always there. And every time they meet her, she's like preparing meat of some sort, but it's always something that they don't know. And they always get a little nervous around the cockatrice because, of course, it can paralyze them. And all she need do is just flip the cage, and she can go out there and petrify them.
Yeah.
So it's the familiars. And that's the other thing too. I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but I love this topic. The amount of other paraphernalia and related stuff to hags. So you can have them have familiars, you can have them have minions, you can have them have they could literally control other people to come mess your day because they've made a deal with the hag for something else. They can it's so rich, and it makes, honestly, the thing I'm looking forward to the most with the February 2025 release of the Monster Manual is this Arch Hag stat block.
Yeah.
I really hope it doesn't disappoint, because I could really see a really cool hag stat block come to fruition with this. And I love that there's so many infinite ways to make hags unique in creepy ways. Like, this one that can tear its face off and put on a different mask, or turn your players into chickens if they renege on a deal. It's just so cool.
Yeah.
So cool. Anyway, sorry. Rant over.
Fine. Absolutely. We could
talk about hags all day
for a hag podcast. I would be remiss if I didn't squeeze in a couple of my tales from the tables that I titled them. My Tuesday night game, it's very difficult to do tales from my Tuesday night game because it's Vecna Eve of Ruin, and I'm conscious that that's still a very fresh adventure that people are almost certainly still in the middle of, and I don't want to spoil things for people if they're in the midst of that adventure. All I can say is, for my Tuesday night game, I am in a very iconic Dungeons and Dragons location, one of the, if not the, arguably most popular setting for D&D, has been for a very long time, and it's one that many of my players have experienced in a separate campaign. And so it's been a lot of fun to throw in little Easter eggs and character references to this location and the characters there within, and watch them react both as players and characters and wrestle with how they do that. And it's also been fun to put those references in, but it immediately becomes clear that they don't mean the same thing that they did for that campaign.
Yeah, okay, I know. I think I know what you're talking about. Can I mime to you what I think it is? And then people who are listening to this will be frustrated that we're doing this. Is this...
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. It is what I thought.
Yes, it is.
Great. Sorry, listeners. You'll have to reach out to us personally if you want more details.
Yeah, I mean, there is a world in which you may be able to guess which one it is, especially if you know which one it is in the book. If you know the chapters.
Right.
But needless to say, putting these little Easter eggs and references in has been a lot of fun, and especially twisting their expectations of those references. I've been doing things like introducing them to characters that they know what will happen to them later.
Mm.
Things that occur in that campaign haven't occurred yet, and so as a player they desperately want to reach out and help these people, but they can't because as the character they don't know anything about them. And so it's been fun to sort of wrestle with their expectations that way, and they've got
Right.
they've had a lot of joy out of doing that.
You are chugging along this book though. Like you
I
are
am.
that is what level are they now?
I am. They are off the top of my head,
16?
sort of, not quite that. I don't think. Like I think they're sort of 13, 14, something
14?
around
Okay.
there.
You're chugging along.
Yeah.
I've added way too much content. I hope my players, if you're in my Monday group of Vecna and you're listening to this, I hope you don't hate me. That we are taking a little longer between levels. I had such a vision for how this could have been more fleshed out, and I got very excited.
There's an argument for both. I mean, we've discussed its expediency actually as a group in both positive and negative light. The one thing I will say is it definitely is very much a sort of A to B to C to D very rapidly.
Yeah.
From my experience, at least, the encounters have been a lot of fun to run, just as encounters. Aside from the shortcomings that I feel the story has in places, the actual encounters themselves have been a lot of fun to run, especially at high level play. Not all of them have been overly challenging, which is of course always a problem for high level play, but they've been a lot of fun. That is to say, I will leave those spoilers aside and just cover my other two games in a little more detail because they're so niche that it's less likely that things are going to be spoiled for people. Embracing Failure and Falling Mammoths. This is the last couple of weeks
Let's
of
hear it.
Odyssey of the Dragon Lords. I've mentioned many times, and apologies if you're sick of hearing this, Odyssey of the Dragon Lords, very good adventure, has epic paths built into the rules where each character has their own sub-story that they're trying to achieve in the midst of the main campaign that the group experiences as a whole. And each of them have tasks that they need to complete. And it got to one of our particular players' tasks, just one of these very most recent sessions, to forge something. And they found a forge. They faced a monster that was vexing them horribly because it had the ability to choose an action that a player had just taken, mark that moment, and then later on in the round, reverse them and any other creature affected by them back to that moment to recast or redo that thing again. And their hit points, spell slots, and everything reverted back to what they were in that moment. And and they could fly this monster, and our barbarian leapt off a cliff to grapple this monster and succeeded, and it marked that moment. And then and it had a decent amount of its hit points left at that moment. And then later on would keep reversing time back to that moment because unless it could be stopped in some way, meaning that this player had to keep making his saving throw to make that grapple leap, and inevitably failed and fell off the cliff. And then the creature gained its hit points back, and it kept repeating again.
Wow.
But beyond that, they defeated that
very,
monster.
Very Sisyphus feeling.
Yeah. This creature guarded a room which had a forge in it and some notes, and this player immediately, you could tell the player, and you know who you are, they'd written a lot of lore about how this was going to go. They'd even written a grand chant and speech that their character would loudly proclaim while they were forging this item, and very impassioned, this player read out this speech and performed this beautiful ritual in front of us all as this forging was taking place, and it came down to a dice roll. And although it wasn't a particularly high DC, the dice roll failed. And this was something that the player and character it was kind of baked into them that they'd always failed. And so this was their desperate hope that this was the moment that they would break free of that curse and forge something truly astonishing. And the dice said no. And that's why this is called Embracing Failure, because this player, rather than get frustrated or annoyed, I'm sure they were in some way, they fully embraced it and had the character break down and, no, please no. And, gathering up the pieces. And it was so emotional and so impactful in the moment And everyone was kind of enraptured by their performance, because not only had they performed this beautiful ritualistic forging, but then continued the roleplay into its failure and changed their character's entire mood and aura and facade based on this failure, and that continued into the following sessions. And each player has, in character, reacted to them and tried to embrace them and take them under their wing and check that everything's okay. And it was wonderful to watch them embrace failure like that and just fully accept it as part of the story. And we all agreed this at the table. It's what makes the act of dice rolling relevant and interesting
Part of the
and
game.
unique to the hobby, is
Yeah.
that it can be just as narratively satisfying to embrace a failure like that as it can to succeed at the role.
That's very true. I think as GMs, and I think you'll agree with me. I don't think you'll feel any different about this, but I think we're often tempted to help guide the story along a certain path in the favor of the player, right? We want them to succeed. Ultimately, of course, we want them to succeed overall. And there are many times where I've not necessarily pulled punches when it's a more direct thing. Like, if it's a new character and they just haven't learned how to play their character well, I might make some adjustments. But there's an inclination to be more forgiving, or to set up a scenario where they basically, if they fail, they can try again, or if they don't, or they can't fail, or something along those lines, because it's too momentous of a moment.
Yeah.
And if you can trust your player, which is a big thing, if you're certain that the player will appreciate you playing the dice or letting the dice tell the story, it's the only thing that makes these tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and other systems different from just a collaborative storytelling experience. It's the fact that random chance will always be an applicable factor, and that if you can embrace the power of failure, if you can fall forward and use that to open up a new avenue, it is so unique. You won't find that in other, or it's very rare to find in other stories, right? I think a good example of this happening in modern media is Game of Thrones / the Song of Ice and Fire series. If that were a campaign setting, there were many failed roles. If you think about it, right? In Game of Thrones, Ned Stark completely failing to persuade King Joffrey that he was not a traitor to the realm, etc. But there's something so beautiful about the simplicity of the fact that the dice can tell you no when you want to go in a certain direction, and the discovery that you can have. If you're a player, I highly encourage you to let go of the same way that a GM has to let go of how they think their campaign is going to go. As a player, I would encourage you to let go of your perceptions and your hopes for how something will go for you. I know a dime a dozen players where they're like, oh, I rolled a 2 on my only attack in 20 minutes. Fuck this game. I hate it. It's so lame. There's something so beautiful about leaning into it, and so much fun. If you can find the fun in failure, the game will have so much more meaning for you. And I discovered that a little too early in D&D, I think. It was my very first session, and I've told the story before. I rolled a big D20 and I rolled a 1, and I cursed the entirety of the town with like a rotting disease. And I was like, cool, thanks for the session, guys. This was a fun game. I guess I'll see you at rehearsal next week. And they were like, no, come back, play D&D with us again. I'm like, I can't. We lost. And they're like, no, you don't lose D&D. There's just more story. The story continues. And I was like, oh, okay. And yeah, the rest is history. But beautiful. So how did this turn into Mammoths?
Well, I was going to say, you talked about the campaign not going how you expected. The Falling Mammoths bit. So a week on from this, they were going to a new island and to face a dragon, a story-significant dragon for their individual story, and for one of the characters in particular, their whole lineage and epic path was related to this dragon. And it was an adult dragon. It was an adult green dragon in its lair that proceeded to attempt strafing runs at them on the island before they got to the lair in order to whittle them down, take some resources off them, take some hit points off them. And it succeeded, but it succeeded at cost because, sadly for its strafing runs to weaken the party before its major encounter ended up taking 2 of its legendary resistances out.
Ooh.
And so when it got to the actual fight, those legendary resistances would have come in very handy when,
Sure.
as it was flying around the battlefield, somebody managed to get on its back and then be polymorphed into a mammoth.
Oh no! Just weighing it down immediately.
And I gave it a saving throw for that. Of course, and it didn't just succeed, but it had every chance of succeeding, and it did both times they did it. And it was a significant factor in the defeat of that dragon, was it being weighed down by a creature that was as big as, if not arguably bigger in some ways, than it while it was trying to fly.
Denser at a smaller point of mass instead of evenly distributed. For a creature that relies on flight and balance and the very beautifully designed way that their bodies and their tails and their wings, presumably a dragon, would work in flight, the fact that you then just put a lump of fat and wool in the form of a mammoth on their backs is hilarious to me. They're like, ugh! It's so easy to throw off a flight pattern of anything. Imagine now putting a mammoth on it.
It was
great.
So much fun. Obviously much more lighthearted than the previous example of the story, and it was met with resounding cheers, and of course, as a GM, I totally embraced it. It would be wrong of me not to. And it was so much fun. The victory felt so earned, and the fact that its attempt to weaken them ended up being almost a deciding factor in its defeat by losing those legendary resistances, risking trying to weaken them. Those legendary resistances could have been used on its saving throws to not fall out of the sky because of this mammoth backpack that it had on. And so, it was just that beautiful mix of those serendipitous events that led to really a lot of fun at the table.
Listen, I'm a numbers guy. Well, not really, actually. I'm terrible at math. But I would always hope that there were more specific systems to tell us exactly how this would work, right? Like, okay, what does happen when a creature's overburdened in flight? How does that work? How much reaction time are there in moments when things are falling out of the sky? Of course, D&D doesn't have that built in. At least 5th edition doesn't, which makes it both at once liberating because you can tell the story exactly how you need to, and you can just rule of cool it and say, cool, the mammoth, sends the dragon into a spiral as it crashes down into the ground, or we'll have to burn a few legendary resistances in order to save from doing so. Or I would have loved to see the unburdened swallow flight velocity of carrying a coconut. I want to know the specifics of how the physics of that would work, just as a thought experiment. But otherwise we'd be playing D&D all day. God. So cool.
Going a little longer than a standard episode, but I would be equally remiss if I didn't get this last tale in, because it pertains to Fallout, and I hinted it early in the episode. Dire Dice and Cold Hard Lies. The group were sent alongside the guiding voice of a Protectron to a bunker in the middle of the Commonwealth because this Protectron had been guarding it. It was attacked by raiders, and the Protectron thought that the information inside was deeply relevant to the safety of the entire Commonwealth and sought a group of stalwart adventurers to go and get inside this heavily fortified bunker to get this information and help everyone in the Commonwealth survive an oncoming threat. However, when they got there and they were attempting to hack their way into the blast doors of this bunker, a radiation storm hit, a rad-izzard, which was warranting saving throws every round of initiative and applying some fairly nasty radiation damage and fatigue points to the characters if they failed their saving throws, while they all huddled round in the freezing cold trying to hack this terminal. At one point, our handy robot decided to, and you can do this mechanically in the game, swap out whatever your attribute is that you would normally use for your luck attribute instead, and attempt to blind luck their way into the password.
Ooh, that's cool.
It is cool, but it didn't work.
Of
And
course.
so they were, they were up against it, and that's how the session ended, was them, cameras zooming out through the blizzard as we slowly lose sight of them, desperately trying to hack into this terminal in the blizzard. And when we came back, it took a little bit longer, but they did get inside, only to find that inside the bunker, as well as information they needed and resources they needed, there was a mutated monstrous feline with eyes running down its head and shoulders and covered in spikes
Ooh.
and teeth everywhere. And
Ooh.
it was a
What is
notable
that?
sort of boss encounter. It was a unique monster to the campaign. It isn't something you
Okay.
would
Okay.
experience in Fallout the game, but very
Right.
similar to many things. Um, exactly the sort of horrible monstrosity that you would expect from Fallout, and
Sure.
it kicked hard, and they were faced with the option of getting in close inside this narrow bunker with this thing and avoiding the blizzard, or staying out in the blizzard and facing the repercussions of fatigue and radiation to stay at distance from this monster.
Right.
It kicked them really hard, but they finally brought it down with some carefully placed flamethrower action from the Mr. Handy robot, as well as
Nice.
a incredibly well calibrated combat shotgun, which deals an obscene amount of damage when it gets it off. They discovered a deeply story pertinent series of clues that they've been desperately looking for on the terminal inside, at which point the Protectron revealed. And spoilers for a small side quest in an otherwise fairly obscure, I think, sadly, in general game that I don't think many people are going to be playing.
Hmm.
But you should, because it's a lot of fun if you're a Fallout fan. The Protectron revealed that it was in fact a mercenary robot and intended not to save the Commonwealth with this information, but to sell it to the Institute
Oh no, not the
in
Institute.
exchange for enough caps to set up a robot-only bed and breakfast. And at which point the players were furious with this Protectron because they knew something was wrong, but
Of course.
it was
Right.
so, please help the Commonwealth. It was so hard to read
Nice.
that they couldn't determine whether it was lying, but they knew it
Right.
probably was. And some of the details about how it had escaped the raiders and what had happened there was no sign of raiders when they got there. They were so like, there's something isn't right. Where
Hmm.
have these raiders gone, Protectron? And
Sure.
I should say its designation was D3N-Z3L, which is deputy
D3N?
D3N-Z3L, Deputy Denzel.
Denzel. Deputy Denzel.
And so when it revealed that it was in fact ready to kill them and started firing off a tear gas launcher as well as arm lasers in the middle of this close
Jesus.
quarters room, they were
Jesus.
so angry at it that when they eventually did defeat it, they they dismantled it piece by piece by piece to make sure that it would never ever again cause them problems.
Oh
And
my gosh.
the reason I
It's
called it Hired
hilarious.
Dice is because if this were a game of D&D, it would have been the most crit-heavy game of D&D I'd ever played.
Oh. On which side?
However,
20s or ones?
on 20s, it was crit. It
On
was
20s,
20s all the
crits.
way. However, in Fallout, it's the opposite way round, and higher is
Right.
worse. So 20s were complications. They were also rolling like 10, 11 dice worth of damage dice and doing no damage or 1 point of damage with these damage dice.
Ooh. Oh my gosh.
Round after round after round, and it just became this exercise in mathematical improbability that these things were going to occur, and it led to a much more interesting fight in the end because they were absolutely up against the wall. This thing was firing tear gas bombs at them and stripping lasers
gosh.
at them.
My God.
At one point, one of the players fired a shotgun at close range at it, and they got another 20, which is a complication, which ended up rolling out as a
Jesus.
ricochet shot, which hit one of the other
Oh
players in the leg, which was the only
no.
place they didn't have armor.
Oh no. Oh no.
It was
Just
absolute chaos.
that's chaos. I love it. I love it because it's not fun and memorable unless you have these stories, right?
Yeah,
It's
and it's
just
not Fallout if it doesn't go that way.
if it's very much so. This is the perfect environment and system for it. Like even if it was another Bethesda property like Skyrim, it still wouldn't have this pull. It has to be as ridiculous as this, right? That's brilliant. That's brilliant. This is very unrelated, but like there's a moment that a dear friend of mine as you probably know, we were playing Helldivers earlier this year a lot before it became very, very silly. And there was this moment where it was just the two of us, and we were on this super high level mission, and we were trying to extract with some samples, and we were gunning for the extraction ship. At the countdown timer was running. We had timed it perfectly. We were way outnumbered. There was no way we were going to survive unless we were hiding. We had spent 40 minutes hiding and fighting for our lives against these bugs. And as we're running towards the ship, my friend was like, just go. You've got the samples. Just get on the ship. And then I was like, oh God, we're not going to make it, Minty. We're not going to make it. We're not going to make it. And then I get to the ship and I'm like, we made it, brother. And I turn around and I give out the hug emoji, which is our normal standard practice. And as I turn around, I realized he had not intended to come join me, so there was no hug. Instead, a charger, which if you know the Helldivers franchise, is this enormous tank, rhinoceros-style bug, just runs through me and knocks me clear off the LZ, the landing zone of the shuttle. And I go like, "Ah!" And you can hear my friend on the mic because we saved the clip going, "What, you idiot, why didn't you get on the ship?" And we were laughing and dying so hard. And he was so mad at me, but I was like, look, we would have never remembered this day had it not been for this idiotic thing that I did where I turned around to give you a hug and a charger just blew me off the landing pad. But that's what this stuff is about. That's what makes these games so much fun. If they didn't crit fail or crit with complications on all of those rolls against your Protectron, it would have not been the story that you got to tell. You know?
Yeah, so, absolutely,
awesome
and
stuff.
may never have made it into Tales from the Tables this week. It was worth telling for those
exact
failures.
I love it.
Embracing failure. Perhaps that should be the title of this week's episode.
Embracing failure. Let's do it, Rob.
I know we've gone a little long this week. I hope it's been interesting for you. We'll absolutely see you next week for more Tales from the Tables. And as always, if you have Tales from the Tables, please do send them to us either on the Discord or you can get me at damien@rolldark.co.uk if you want to send it direct. I'll happily look to read them out on the podcast for you. I'd love to hear from you.
Exactly.
That's from me. Have an amazing week.
Likewise,
JC,
everyone.
Thank you so much for joining me this week.
Thank you, Damien. As always, thank you for holding down the fort last time. But yeah, looking forward to our next one. Take care. Until then, everyone.
Incredible. Bye-bye.